And so let's give an applause again to the Alloy Orchestra, Terry Donahue and Ken Whitaker. And you know there's a third one, but he's back in the East Lobby.
There he is in the doorway, waiting to sell you stuff.
There he is, yes. And you can, we'd like for you to listen, but you'd like them to go to the East Lobby. It's okay if some of you go to the East Lobby. They're selling their wares back there. And joining them on stage is going to be Todd Rindelman. He's the Director of Film Studies and a Professor of Communications at Seattle Pacific University, where he teaches, here he is. And he also wrote a book about Roger, Todd Rindelman. And again, Michael Phillips. You have one?
Yep, we got him.
You don't have to share.
Okay. Thanks for coming back with this, which I think is one of your most aptly brooding and melancholic scores.
Well, thank you. We're good at brooding.
I wonder two things, and then we can get to the music. We were talking earlier before you played that there's two films that immediately precede this one that Epstein really took a lot from. One is it's called, I think in French, La Fèvre, right? The Fèvre. Fever, which is a 40-minute film by Louis Deloc, who came up with this concept of photogenie, and that was an enormous success. And he also took a lot visually from an Abel-Gance film from 1922, a 4.5-hour film, which I've never seen actually, La Rue, although I have seen this justly famous train wreck sequence in that. And a lot of the visual techniques from that ended up in what we just saw. And how did you guys first see it or hear about it?
Well, we were asked to do it for the Telluride Film Festival. In conjunction, we did scores for both Fièvre, the early 40-minute short, and for this one at the festival 2 festivals ago. So it was the directors of the festival who had discovered it had been newly restored and wanted us to do it.
And those two films are markedly similar, are they not?
They are. It made for an odd show because you show this 40-minute film and then you watch the same film again from a different director's point of view. Now, from a study perspective, you know, the filmmaking styles are radically different, but the plot is exactly the same. So,
one thing that did strike me, just in terms of how blithely unconcerned with, even for the time, would be kind of, I think, conventional melodramatic pace, is that Jean, even though he's described as a dock worker, really only seems to be interested in hanging on to his title as Marseille's middle distance staring champion.
I think the director discovered that he could put a little glycerin in his eyes so that they just shone all the time and just used that throughout the entire film.
But the close-ups, my God, I mean, my God, especially of Marie, really are remarkable and so deeply subjective in that they are directly looking at the viewer so many times. You can see exactly where so many filmmakers, Hitchcock among them, I think, who started out right around the same time, 1922, 23, took a lot of that sort of like track in, track out, you know, just in terms of the bodies in space. It's really something, I think. Was this your first experience with it?
No, it's not, but it is hard to track down the film in general here. I mean, the eyes are just mesmerizing to watch her performance in the film. It's really striking. Yeah.
Have you seen it projected?
No, this is a great gift. Yeah, absolutely. I've just seen it on DVD, and even that just was available through the PAL, system before this. So it's challenging to track down.
Now, how do you tease out the right kind of brooding melancholia witut giving into the wrong kind of lack morose. Blah, 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 blah.
Well, it's a delicate balance. The brooding and the morose and the ultra melodramatic are actually really easy. It's the leitmotifs which are a lot more difficult for us, and the scenes where nothing really happens, where we feel like we have to do more and kind of make it happen. So it's the hardest part when any of the films that we do is coming up with the first piece of music. You know, you stare at this and it's like, okay, we have an hour and a half of this music, and it's always incredibly daunting. And then we get in the studio, and once we get that first piece, it just sort of flows. And then when we get to the point where, you know, one of us is frustrated or we feel like, you know, it's not going anywhere, okay, it's time to stop. And then almost miraculously, you come back the next day and we're ready to tackle that next scene. So, you know, we've been doing it for a little while now, and, you know, we kind of get the hang of it, and we know when something is not working. And the trick is to turn something that's not working and find something it really is.
Was it the three-quarter time theme that came first, or was it something else, or?
Well, basically what we do, we disregard the titles because that doesn't really tell us anything, and then we just go with the first scene, which is. And
there are. Am I right? I think I'm correct in saying that there were remarkably few intertitles for the time.
Right, which I really like too. You know, you don't get bogged down in trying to read the stuff that's going on. Instead, you try to figure out what that means. So it was the scene in the bar, and then you just kind of find your way in the meandering in the bar, and then it just builds from there. And usually by the end, we're just like going, and you're doing like 10-minute scenes without even thinking about it and talking to each other. And then we're like, oh, okay, that's 10 minutes down. Okay, we can do that. You know, so it just, you know, just once you get rolling, it just kind of comes naturally.
Can you talk a little bit about Todd, about the just about not where the film came from necessarily, but where, even though it was a popular box office disappointment, 3 days in Paris, the original run, 3 days, an enormous sort of aesthetic influence and critical regard grew and kind of remains today.
Sure, yeah. I mean, you could easily argue that Epstein is the least known major French film artist of the 1920s. In all fairness, the movie wasn't created to be a commercial success necessarily. The idea was to really play with cinema, as you mentioned in the opening remarks, and he truly did believe that cinema needed to be something completely separate from painting and from literature, and you can see him playing with it with the tremendously creative, you know, cinematography and so forth. And you could argue that this movie is sort of a bridge in a way between the extremely artistic avant-garde movement, like with L'Inhuman that you brought to us a couple years ago, and then the poetic realism of the 30s and so forth. And you can see that here with this movie, tremendously creative cinematography, at the same time focusing on the proletariat, the working people's struggles and crises and so forth. So you can see his interests and the kind of pivotal place that he has in cinema history in this film itself.
Did Jean Vigo speak of influence from this film with L'Atalante and other?
I don't know. I haven't read anything about his take on it. His movies are much more sensual. This really conveys this deep sense of longing and waiting and wanting and so forth. That's how I see those in contrast to one another.
We'll take some questions here, if we could. Love to hear some more. Yeah, right here in the front. Do we have a microphone on? Beautiful. Thank you. One section away. Hand up again, sir. Here we go. Front row.
Front row. Hi, thank you very much. This is really a great experience. Orchestra was awesome. In the film, there was some music displayed with title and author. Were you tempted at all to look at that and listen to it and see what they might have been playing in the show?
I get stuck with this one. No, we weren't tempted. You know, we flirted with this off and on throughout our extremely long career. There's occasionally music that's shown on screen. Occasionally we have played it. For the most part, though, partially because of our instrumentation, and secondly because of our inclination, we tend to just go toward our own compositions, which we feel are easy to match to the screen. And oddly, a couple times when we have tried to match the music, it's not really felt like it fit very well. This may have. We didn't really explore it.
Anyone else? Yeah, right here.
We have a question right here.
Hi, thank you. I was interested that you said that writing the more cheerful parts was more of a challenge for you, because I was particularly taken with the music around the amusement park. And so I'd love to know a little bit more about that and how you might have done it differently if, say, it was an amusement park scene in a romantic comedy.
Well, the amusement park scene was really challenging because Petite Paul was having a great time. Not so much Marie. So where's the line? How do you convey both? So we really tried to, and that was kind of the hardest part. You can come up with, okay, now we have a happy little amusement park melody, but it was so much deeper than that. So we tried to, warp it in a way that would convey his happiness and her complete anguish. And then you got John coming in here and there, and so you're trying to deal with all three. So I'm not sure how he really came about it, but just take the simple waltz, and then try to twist it just so it fits the picture. So hopefully that worked.
Is that not remarkable that in the epilogue, we're reading one thing, and we're seeing the most profoundly uneasy depiction of happily ever after?
Yeah. Absolutely. So we end with love allows one to forget everything, and it's clear that he hasn't forgotten anything.
While doing very little too. Yeah.
And this is critical because Epstein is laying the foundation for conventions that will become consistent with art house cinema for years to come, this sense of ambiguity with an ending where you can read it in two different ways. And people actually expect that in art house films for the future.
Maybe they were just tired from making all those fireworks that were symbolic of whatever happened just before that.
Point. Who else?
Yeah.
We had
Sorry.
Yeah, here we go, right here.
To your left.
Hi, I'm fascinated by the process of creation, and I'm wondering about the three of you, whether you work on all of it together, or some people more drawn to the sad parts or the other parts, or how has your collaborative experience grown? And
We are very collaborative, and I think in an extremely unusual fashion. I'm sure you guys have heard me say this for the last 15 years. We're very proud of it. We compose collaboratively. We sit in the room together. Very little do we take something home, come up with a theme, and bring it back in. So, we'll run the film on, the computer, and we'll look at the first scene. We usually watch it first, and then somebody just throws out an idea, whether it's a drum part or a keyboard line or Terry on the accordion. Somebody has a kernel of an idea, and we all fall in line, try to come up with something that works with it, matches it, builds and ebbs and flows along with the movie itself. So there's not a single composer. Now, obviously, Roger does the lion's share of melodic composing, which is, let's face it, what everybody in the world thinks it's music. People always say, oh, well, you're a drummer. Are you ever going to learn music?
I don't even really consider you two musicians at all.
No. Well, I'm the PR flack, actually. So.
But it's like any true collaboration. First of all, it's great that there's only three of us, so decisions get made pretty quickly, and you're never deadlocked. So we just move forward, and it's kind of like any team that you try to emphasize everybody's strengths and hide everybody's weaknesses. So after 28 years, I think we're pretty good at knowing each other's strengths and weaknesses, and so we just go from there.
All right, we have a question towards the very back here.
Hello. This is my 21st Ebertfest, and I think this is the exact best restoration of a silent film I have ever seen anywhere in the universe. Who did it?
The
And can they do it all?
The Cinémathèque Française did the restoration. They, I believe, have the film in their collection, so it was up to them. And they worked with a variety of other archives in Europe. They're very good at collaborating in Europe between the archives. And typically what they do now is one archive or a museum or something will decide to do a restoration, and they call in every print or negative or soundtrack throughout the whole archive system in the world. They'll bring them all together in one place. They'll go through them meticulously and say, you know, this is the master print, this is the best print we have of the whole thing, but, you know, on that 57th scene, it's missing 3 frames, which the Dutch print has, so we're gonna fly that in from there. So I think this one is pretty consistent throughout, but I'm sure that they pulled pieces from other different.
I'd like to just add one thing about to the previous question about the collaboration. Does the time span of what it really takes start to finish for you three to really begin work on the score to finish it, does that vary widely film to film, or is there a fairly predictable amount of time?
Well, it depends on the deadline, of course.
Terry's got a cold, by the way. He doesn't sound like
I'm
this.
a little hoarse. So basically we give ourselves 3 to 4 months with each film to start the process and have it performance ready. And then from there on, it's constantly a work in progress from there. So there's always room within each film where there's freedoms for each of us to go a little left of what we had composed. And I think that keeps it fresh each time and keeps the ideas kind of coming, keeps it interesting for us, which hopefully helps keep it interesting for the audience.
Last year's blockbuster, for those of you who were here, The Page of Madness, the film that made you all so happy when you went home.
I actually was not here. I was away for that part.
I'm sorry. Well, that's why you still have a bright future ahead of you. So, that one was composed in 3 days. We had completed this one, and we found out The Page of Madness was going to be released as a Blu-ray, and we had wanted to do this one for literally decades. We had got offered once, couldn't do it.
This one?
No, last Page of Madness. So we had 3 days. Now that was a very, it was so complex that it was simple in a way. There's not like regular scenes to it. You don't say, oh, well, you know, she goes into the madhouse here, she does a little thing, and now there's dinner, and they leave. It's all meshed together. So that allowed us to improvise on it without having to be so conscious of the exact scene changes and such. So that was a remarkably quick one, and this was more of the normal 3-month.
Insanity seems to be our specialty.
To your left. To your left.
Yes, thank you. Seeing this film for the first time in this context and with such wonderful music, and it's really a treat. I've seen other films of the period, not by Epstein, but of that same kind of movement, of the kind of film club movement in France of the early 20s into the later period. And the film that reminded me most of was a 40-minute film called The Smiling Madame Baudet, by a woman, Geneviève Dulac. And I wanted to say I see influences there, because this one is so much about masculinity in crisis or something, like the too soft or the too hard or something. The Smiling Madame Baudet is a feminist film, and it's a real criticism of the marriage situation, not at all as ambiguous as this. So I found myself thinking of that influence, and I quickly, thank goodness for phones and Google, said, I wonder which was first. Well, Madame Baudet came out on November 9th, 23, says IMDb. This one came out in France on November 23rd, 1923. So they're exactly coterminous, but probably, I mean, I'm sure Epstein and Dulac knew each other. I don't know if they had seen each other's work in progress. So I just wondered, I guess maybe Todd and anybody else, to speak to the kind of gender depictions here in the context maybe of film art in France at the time, if you have other ideas about that. Because this is not at all romantic. not even the relationship. I get so impatient with Jean, and even more impatient with Marie, because I mean she could have gotten the knife. The only interesting character is the woman is the so-called cripple. She's the interesting character, right? I like that, and maybe she has the happy ending. So I don't know. I just responses to the narrative more and the character issues.
Well, I have one just comment. So the neighbor, the so-called cripple, is the wife of the actual director, Epstein, and is a filmmaker of her own right, whose films I have not been able to find and see. Has anybody seen them? Know anything about them?
Yeah, you want to speak to the...
I think they did know each other, the artists. Yeah, I believe that he was mentored by several major directors in the period and so forth, and really benefited from that. I mean, it's a rich characterization of the creative neighbor with the crutch, who's incredibly industrious at the end of the film with the gun, and it's a wonderful surprise that she is able to insert herself into their triangle.
And yet, she doesn't look particularly pleased in that coda either.
Okay.
Yeah, the unpaid au pair, you know. Right? It's what, and not just for the last dozen or so years I've been coming here, but it's striking how much cinema worldwide, European, Russian, American, always hinged. The stories always hinged because life and just everyday life and diversion hinged on the carnival or the circus. And I have to wonder how do you the appeal, the musical appeal of those milieus, totally compelling. How do you avoid? Do you find yourself saying, that sounds too much like he who gets slapped, or this sounds like a little we need to maybe pull a variation on that in a different way.
Well, that brings us to our advertisement for next year's show. It's a film called Gallery of Monsters. It's produced by Marcel L'Herbier, who did L'Inhumaine, who we saw a couple of years ago. And it was directed by the star of L'Inhumaine, Jacques Catalin. And it all takes place, or almost all of it takes place in a country circus, not a big one, but a very small, kind of poor one. And the Gallery of Monsters actually refers to the sideshow characters, who, very much like the later film Freaks, are not the monsters. They're a wonderful, supportive community of people living together. The monsters are the owner of the circus and the lion tamer who's normal.
You just gave it away, man.
So, and when I found this one, and it came through another one of our favorite, connections, Serge Bromberg of Lobster Films, and I told these guys, well, I found this really cool film, and it's another circus film. And Roger said, another circus film? Because this, if you count this one, this is 6 out of our total repertoire of about 30 films. So.
But we do try to take into account, okay, there's this, sometimes, this sounds a little like something else, so how do we change it? How do we make it not sound like something from Variety or not sound like something from He Who Gets Slapped, but yet still keep that really twisted negative circus thing going. So it's because they're all twisted and negative, which is kind of the fun part. But so find a way to, change it up. But that's part of the fun. I mean, each film takes us somewhere different and keeps us fresh and keeps us sharp and looking for different ways to translate.
We have a question to your right.
Thank you. Here we go.
Thank you very much. You are master storytellers, and I think that yes, applause.
Hear, hear.
And for me, you exemplify, you are Tchaikovsky's Peter and the Wolves of silent film. I mean, you exemplify how music can tell a story with images. My question has to do with what's happening today, where there is a great deal of imposition of music that is pushing people to think a certain way about a film because maybe it's not in the film. the story is not there, and the music is being used to try and guide people to understand that story. I wonder how you feel about the use of music in contemporary film, where it is extremely heavy, and I find distracting, and also how you feel about sound design replacing or being used to tell story in contemporary film.
Well, first of all, thank you for the compliment. That is a lovely thing to hear. Well, with contemporary films, strangely, what I find the most appealing is the musics that I don't notice. And I find myself specifically trying to listen to music. So if I watch a film and haven't really noticed the music, I find that's been the most effective to me. But conversely, there is definitely a lot that is distracting, or, you know, if I don't think the music really fits, it really kind of like sticks the hatchet in my head. But, you know, it's like anything in any genre. There's really great new music going on, and then there's a lot of schlock and dreck. So, you know, it runs the gamut. And there's just so much being produced now that it does kind of get watered down, so it's harder and harder to find the real gems.
In contemporary films, talkies, as we refer to them,
they'll never catch on.
It's very hard to tell a story because there's all this pesky dialogue that gets in your way. So mostly music is sort of interstitial. It happens between things and is not conveying the story, but is actually just kind of bridging gaps until you get to the next dramatic monologue or something like that. It is under the law dialogue, but you know, at that level, it's got to be loud.
But it does go under, and so sometimes it can be distracting. And then when it also seems like there might be a frustration with composers that have to underscore so much. So then when they have a chance to really go, they kind of go possibly too far in the other direction. So then it's like, you know, from the underscoring to the blow your head off.
This was Bernard Herrmann, you know, relished the opportunities that Hitchcock gave him, particularly in a film like Vertigo, where you had an entire sequence where James Stewart is waiting for Kim Novak, the transformed, sort of obsessively transformed Kim Novak, to come out as, you know, Madeline. And that's how many minutes of dialogue-free, high, obsessive drama to add the music to really. And he used to talk about, Herrmann used to talk about music that would, lower forms of film music that would tell the audience what to feel. The ambitious, hopefully more effective, are telling you what the characters are feeling, you know. And that's a fairly big distinction. Hard to do. Easy to talk about, hard to do.
And if you listen very carefully to the work we do, you can usually read what I had for breakfast.
Sound design. Can you talk about that?
I love sound design. I mean, we are as much sound designers as we are musicians. I mean, Terry and I literally spent 50% of the time on this one just making a kind of a current of background noise. You know, it's usually just rolling on cymbals or gongs, or, you know, just the lightest rhythms, which you're not even hardly supposed to recognize. You know, sound effects when the gunshot hits, we do that. This one being as, I don't want to say slow, but, you know, gently paced and whatever, doesn't encourage you to break the mood with sound effects and the sound design. But, you know, the more active movies, we're really playing all the levels, you know, from the Foley artist, you know, to the melodic.
And like I said before, there's some of the contemporary ones are truly great, and, you know, there's others that are possibly less than that.
To your left, all the way back, under the balcony.
Okay.
So I love the film. I love the music. I do notice things sometimes in film that really wakens me to the film. I love the scene in the carnival when Petit Paul steps literally off of the ride, and everything is in motion except for him and Marie, and the film just gets very exciting at that point, and I thought it was so well done. But I noticed at the end of the film, when the young girl's on the floor and she's pulled the trigger, that she's pulled the trigger once, and I heard the Alloy Orchestra shoot once. And then I saw a bloom of blood on his chest and from his head.
Drives me crazy.
What the hell?
It's one gunshot, and he got shot twice. It's amazing. It's the split bullet like Kennedy, I think.
It's a Kennedy.
The ricochet. Yeah, it drives me crazy every time. I'm glad someone else saw that.
But I'm mostly glad you only heard one gunshot, because it's really hard to do sound effects for gunshots. When somebody hits somebody over the head with a stick, you watch him wind up, you see the stick go down, you know exactly when it hits him, and you hit that sound effect. A gunshot, she's holding the gun, and then it goes off. There's no exact timing of that. So I started to hit that gunshot 2 seconds too early. And I tapped the drum, but very quietly. I was able to keep my stick off of it, and then I hit the real gunshot. So that's a triumph that you didn't hear the first one. So.
All right, we have one more question.
One more, final question. Okay.
Hi, thanks again for coming. I did not attend last year to see Page of Madness, but I have seen the film, and there was a very well-regarded score for it that was composed, not too long ago. What's it like to score a film that has a very well-regarded score already?
Oh, it's great. You just turn it off and don't listen to it. And if you want the second tier score, we have that available on Blu-ray with our less than stellar score, apparently. But yeah, we try not to go back and listen to stuff that's happened. I mean, sometimes we do, but we don't want to be influenced. And when we started doing this, we started doing without any, knowledge of what happened in the past. So we've kind of continued that process of not really knowing what's going on, just kind of going with off the seat of our pants. And we find that it's kind of worked for us. So, and that's the thing about silent films and the musics. You could watch the same music 10 different times with 10 different scores, and it would make you feel 10 different ways. So, it's a beautiful art form. And but again, right back there, that you can buy the Blu-ray and see if ours is as good as the one you're thinking about.
Almost all these films nowadays have multiple scores by different people. For instance, this one, we are not on the soundtrack, so we're kind of the also-ran. A film we did, Variete, and these are ones that didn't have an original score from the time, got a big release in Berlin, and they hired an American group called the Tiger Lilies to do a kind of German cabaret style thing, and it was the most reviled score I have ever witnessed. Everybody hated this score, and it was exactly the right idea too. You'd have to listen to it. And so, there is a need for, well, I don't know if there's a need, but there's certainly we're all pushed to keep doing new scores for these, and every now and then, like our Man with a Movie Camera score. Well, everybody's done a Man with a Movie Camera. I mean, it's 100 scores to that. It's such an amazing film. We got ours on the Blu-ray or the DVD first, and so ours
available in the back.
So it tends to be the one people know, and that's sort of how it works. If you get there first, then.
Well, we are fortunate and pleased, I think, to hear this score with this film. Thank you, Todd, and Ken, and Terry, Roger in the back, and thank you.